Going to be a busy, busy morning. That's how we'll start things off. Just to give you a rundown of some of the things you can expect in the first hour of the program today. At some point, I hope to talk about the broadband issue at state schools. And it looks like the schools, which are already saving money because they found another alternative versus what they had in place prior, will be looking for an alternative on their own again next year. Hey, you know what? Local control. More local control in a situation like that, not such a bad thing. Also, legislators yesterday, it looks as if they're going to approve driverless cars with some restrictions in the state of Idaho. Now, for years I've been hearing about these things. I dream of being able to get behind the wheel of a car, grab a newspaper or a book, and just put everything into program and sit back and relax, have my coffee, and do some reading. And I never thought I'd see that perhaps in my lifetime. Well, it depends on how long your lifetime is, obviously. I'm hopeful that it'll last a long time. But these are being tested in places like California right now. Many, many pictures online already, people spotting them in traffic. So they could be on the way to Idaho sometime next year. And we'll have some testing going on around the state. Another thing I wanted to mention quickly, we have some guests coming along. Oh, the first one in about 10, 15 minutes. And then I have a second guest in the latter half hour of this hour. He is from an organization called Pro English, and he's going to be talking with us about the latest effort to make English the official language of the United States of America. In the meantime, I happened to see something maybe an hour before coming on air, and I just stopped to read it, not thinking that it was going to have any local impact. Crisis Magazine. I get this in my email every day. I have signed up. I have one email account exclusively for these types of things, but I have signed up for a National Review, Jonah Goldberg from National Review, Daily Caller, several newspapers as well that have websites, and they do these daily online updates. And I get a variety of these every morning, and I sift through them before I go on the air because it does help me a great deal when I'm doing some preparation for a show and keeps me up to speed with what's going on. One of those is Crisis Magazine. And the headline was, "Corporations Are the Enemy." Now, Crisis is a conservative publication. In fact, most of the writers are either Roman Catholic or they are evangelical Christian in their nature. And they teach at a lot of what you'd call traditional colleges around the country. Grove City College in Pennsylvania, you may have heard about that many times on Sean Hannity's program, and some of the guests that he has on the air often come out of the faculty at that particular school. So I was looking through this today, and I thought, why would they be criticizing corporations? Well, it turns out, the writer says that a great many U.S. corporations have filed a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court supporting same-sex marriages in states across the country. And the writer says, you wouldn't think that this would be a corporate issue, but corporations have been signing on for a number of years, including in some of the states individually. They've been coming forward saying, well, this will help us better retain talented workers. In other words, if someone is going to be involved in a same-sex marriage and they can't do it in the state of, pick one, Nebraska, then they won't stay and work for me in Nebraska. They'll go marry somewhere else. Maybe they'll go to Minnesota and they'll settle down there. And we won't have that talent available any longer in the beautiful downtown Kearney, Nebraska, or wherever they happen to be based. So they're filing all of these briefs with the courts on what has been for so long really a social issue. And you wouldn't think that it would be applicable to any large corporate entity. I got to page 2 of this story, and I decided to highlight a couple of paragraphs that I wanted to share with you because it has a lot of play on the local level. The corporations quote specious arguments, the writer says, from recent court decisions. The Ninth Circuit, that is the infamous one in San Francisco staffed by a great many Clinton appointees, which overturned the Idaho marriage laws, wrote this at the time, quote, "When we integrated our schools, education improved. When we opened our juries to women, our democracy became more vital. And when we allowed lesbian and gay soldiers to serve openly in uniform, it enhanced unit cohesion," unquote. Now that's in the decision from the court striking down Idaho's ban on same-sex marriage. The writer at Crisis Magazine goes on to say, with this question in the next paragraph, really? Not that there shouldn't be, he writes, non-segregated schools, but does anyone really believe education has improved from the 1950s until today? See, the court is making an argument as if these things are facts. And these are not facts. These are subject to interpretation and different opinions. We are not talking about anything objective here. These are subjective claims coming out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco, California. The writer goes on to say, the judges argue that open LGBTs, what does that stand for again? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And then I think you can add another 84, 85 different acronyms for all of the different, people who like hula hoops and everything else. LGBTs in the military have led to greater unit cohesion. Well, we don't have that answer. How do we know that? How do we know that? Where is their evidence? And the courts are supposed to deal in things like evidence and facts. He writes, the Ninth Circuit didn't offer any proof of that claim, but these are typical of the kinds of empty arguments made by the sexual left in marriage cases. Empty arguments. You hear it often when you hear people talk on the university level. I remember one time going to a news conference a university president was holding. This must have been 20 years ago. And there had been some issues on campus. They were trying to protect the innocent, of course, the victims, which is any group that, identifies itself as being, what we used to call abnormal, right? Well, you can't say that any longer because the liberals will say, well, please define normal for me. Well, normal's when I don't get that unusual pit in my stomach. When I get the pit in my stomach and that queasy feeling, then I know it's abnormal. That's how I define it. But I went to this news conference, and this college president, he'd been a former college basketball player, seemed like a pretty up-and-up guy, but he kept saying, diversity makes us stronger. A few minutes later, he'd say, and our diversity makes us stronger. And again, later in the speech, he said, and our diversity makes us stronger. Where's the evidence of that? Pat Buchanan was the first person, I think, in media, and this was a couple of years ago. I happened to see him during some interview. He brought the same subject up. Where is their evidence when they say, our diversity makes us stronger? They're not actually citing any evidence. They say it, therefore it's supposed to be true, and everyone is supposed to fall in line and believe it. And now you've got courts making decisions on some of the greatest issues of our time, affecting states like Idaho, and decisions made by your elected representatives in Boise, and the courts simply are following along with that twisted logic. There is no logic in it. They're going along and they're saying, well, we feel this way, and it makes us feel good, and it makes our friends feel good, and this way we won't hurt anybody's feelings, and hurting people's feelings should be against the law. Therefore, all of these things are better. And they're going to be better for everyone. They're going to be better for our country. Liberals have been making these arguments going all the way back into the 50s. Nicholas Kristof, who I believe grew up on a farm in Oregon, not far from here. Nicholas Kristof is a columnist with the New York Times, and he is a flaming lefty. There's no doubt about it. I don't know how a guy comes off a farm and ends up so far out there on the wacko left, but he had a sensible column for a change yesterday when he started talking about how way back in the 1960s, when you had a fellow like Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who later served in the U.S. Senate as a Democrat, albeit not very liberal. He'd worked, in fact, in the Nixon administration before being elected to the U.S. Senate. Daniel Patrick Moynihan had said that the problem in our inner cities, and he was talking about race, was the dissolution of the American family. And everyone denounced him as racist at the time and just said, throw more money at the problem. Yeah, I've got a printing press over here. Yeah, we got one in the basement over here too. Yeah. We'll get the Denver Mint involved, and we'll get the big mint in Washington. And if we have to borrow a lot of money from China, we'll still be able to cure poverty and all of its ills. And that Moynihan, he's just plainly a racist. Well, it turns out he was right. The dissolution of the family has led to some of the greatest social ills we've ever seen. Scientific research backs it up. And Kristof says liberals are finally, after Moynihan made the comments 50 years ago, in 1965, liberals are finally just beginning to admit he may have been right. In fact, I saw a few months ago the blustery fellow from the left on the 5, Bob Beckel, making the same comment, saying that aid to dependent children had just completely devastated American families, but especially those in the minority communities, because it forced women to have more children, but not have the man in the house. Because if the man was in the house, they wouldn't receive as much money. And liberals thought this was a good idea. And they refuse to back down. Once they have an idea and it proves to be a disaster, they refuse to admit it. So they just simply double down. They spend more money, throwing more money, good money after bad, and this is the result you happen to get out of it. He cited a statistic that I thought was interesting. 71% of all black children in this country are now born out of wedlock. The highest total about 10 years ago was in Norway, where they were having Norway or Finland about 77%, and there were concerns in the Scandinavian countries that this was going to create some great schism in their societies, where that you were going to have people who grew up in two-parent households, very few of them, who would have all of those advantages, and then everybody else would just be sucking at the government. Well, you get where I'm going with all of that. But we've got that here now. And the other surprising statistic is he shared that Hispanic families, the numbers are almost as high. And even among Caucasians, the number has now exceeded 50%. And this is going to be, he pointed out, a long-term problem for all of us. And he went on to say that at least, of course, he's still a liberal. He's got his liberal card that he carries with him everywhere he goes. He went on to say that at least in a same-sex marriage, you have stable parents who are doting on their children. And therefore, those children may have better lives than someone growing up as what we used to call a bastard in a family where there is no marriage and only one parent around. We are looking at what you might call cultural disaster. And when you reach these proportions of these numbers, and everybody has been saying over the last dozen years, since I really got started, my first talk radio job on a full-time basis was in 2003. And we could talk about these issues, and the lion's share of emails that I would get or telephone calls that I would get, people would be backing me up. But I noticed a change, and it happened within about 5 years. By the latter part of the last decade, once Mr. Obama took office and liberals started flexing their beer muscles, thinking, hey, we've got control of the country and we'll never lose it from here on out, and we can put our radical agenda into place, they went forward saying you cannot criticize any of these decisions. You cannot criticize single-parent homes, unwed mothers, because a lot of them happen to be minorities. We won't say that, but a lot of them happen to be, and if you criticize it, therefore you must be a racist. And you cannot criticize people who are in same-sex relationships, because that would be simply hateful. Even though, as these people at the court in San Francisco pointed out, they threw out a lot of plaudits, but they have no evidence to back up their claims. Just as there was no genetic evidence when the human genome was decoded, there was no evidence that there was a way people were born that way because of a genetic makeup. So all of these things have taken place, and those of us on the right, we haven't even been able to raise a question when you look at the evidence and say, well, can we wait a minute here and talk about this a little bit more? No. You racist bigot, shut up. And that's where we are today. Country's going to hell, and we can't have a say in trying to turn it around. 8:20. On a lighter note, a guest coming up from CSI, College of Southern Idaho, talking about a couple of musical events for a few minutes with us. That's straight ahead. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. 38 at our studios at 8:20. Just as Ella Donahue was leaving the studio a couple of minutes ago, and I mentioned our next guest was coming up on the topic, Ella said, boy, she said, I would agree with that. I think a lot of people have been hearing this for many, many years. I lived in a state back on the East Coast where we had one state legislator who proposed making English the official language of the state. He simply got shouted down, and the local newspaper folks decided at that point that he was going to be a target or would have a target on his back from then on, and he's no longer serving in public office. So you know how contentious this subject can be. I do want to remind you, it's 8:34. Right now, it's 38 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I'd very much today like to welcome the director of Pro English to our program. His name is Bob Vandervoort. And joining us from an office, Bob, you're somewhere ensconced in what, Northern Virginia?
Yeah, we're in Arlington, Virginia, so not too far from our nation's capital here.
Well, I miss it because I've got my big squiggly W hat on today, and I expect that World Series victory this year, and I'm not going to be there for it.
Yeah, well, they think the Nats are going to have a great team this year. We'll see. We sometimes you hear that, and that doesn't quite pan out, but we'll see.
Well, right off the top, to move on from baseball
Sure.
Save us a little time. I was going to point out, I saw some details the other day. We have a number of people in the U.S. Senate who are sponsoring this legislation, and there may be some hope finally because we have a U.S. Senate now dominated by Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited. Senator James Inhofe just recently introduced a bill. It's S678, and it's already starting to get some Senate co-sponsors. This bill would make English the official language for the United States. So, Bill, make sure your listeners urge their Idaho senators to get on this bill and support it.
Right now, is it just a small group of people who are actually signed on as sponsors?
There are, but we expect it'll grow. The bill was just recently introduced a few weeks ago, and there's also a companion bill in the House of Representatives that Congressman Steve King has introduced. It's H.R. 997, and his bill would also make English the official language. It's just the House version, and again, we need all your Idaho callers and listeners to make sure their congressman gets on it.
I was the young woman who was here just a few minutes ago as a guest on the program was explaining that even in her situation at the college that she attends, she was explaining that there are so many different languages being spoken there that it's sometimes difficult to communicate with your fellow students. And it struck me that we are really turning into a national Tower of Babel, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that because we're actually involved in litigation. We're involved in a lawsuit in Arizona representing a nursing student, and she was suspended from her community college because she wanted her classmates to speak in English. She couldn't understand during group projects what the other students were saying. And the school basically called her a racist and a bigot. They gave her a 9-month suspension, and this is a state that actually has English as its official language. So we are suing the school and trying to defend her in court. But it's just amazing that it's come to this.
I remember, gosh, being a young reporter 25 years ago and interviewing a woman at a local a Hispanic society who was telling me, she said that language itself is culture. And I guess if you dilute the English language, and I know that I have a friend, he always jokes we have just one culture, and that's American culture, and he gets into some arguments because of that. But it doesn't seem we have the same interest. The immigrants of the past all thought they should learn English as quickly as possible to succeed. We don't seem to have that any longer, and I guess people are worried that overall culture is going to be harmed and maybe break apart.
Yeah, Bill, I think that's a very valid concern. I think as you just said, maybe about a century ago, the model in this country was that we were a melting pot. We expected people to come here, learn the language, assimilate. You had presidents like Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, and Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, both encouraging immigrant assimilation. And today, now, 30 or 40 years, we've had all this multiculturalism and bilingualism and this push to basically fracture the nation. And if anything, it's making us more divided instead of bringing us together.
Our guest this morning during this half hour of the program is Bob Vandervoort, and he is the director of Pro English, an organization that has been working to make English the official language of the United States. And he's telling us there are a couple of companion bills in Congress right now that seek to do that. We're going to talk more with him on the other side of the break. It's 8:38 right now at our studios. 37 is our temperature. You're listening to talk, point out top story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. Bob, before we get to the break, for people who'd like to know more about Pro English, can you send them to the website?
Yeah, absolutely. If they check out proenglish.org, they can find a lot of stories and updates on this, some polling data that we link to, and they can also sign up for our action alerts. We've actually got a lot of listeners in Idaho we send an alert out to. Hopefully they're listening in this morning, and yeah, sign up and find out more.
Well, stick around. We'll spend a few more minutes with you on this subject and really see if we can't get some people involved too as well and making this change. And you hate to say it, but perhaps the future of this country is really at stake, at least the country that we've known. More details on all of that coming up with our guest, Bob Vandervoort, in just a few minutes. It's 8:40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Our guest in this segment of the program is Bob Vandervoort, and he is the director of Pro English, which is an organization which is dedicated to making English the official language of the United States. We were talking about this just briefly yesterday. At the founding of this nation, there had been some discussion about an official language. They actually considered German, which likely would not have been a good fit because, well, most of the people already here were speaking English, and that's a difficult language change to make when you already have the culture, a majority going in one particular direction. And a lot of people are surprised when they hear that English is not the official language of the United States. You're listening to Top Story. It's 8:44, 38 at our studios. You're listening also to News Radio 1310, KLIX, or online anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. Bob, when we talk about that, people who seem to be shocked by the fact that we don't have an official language, it speaks to, I guess, the notion that a lot of people just stand back and they're just, I guess, incredulous that we don't have something like that already in place.
Yeah, exactly, Bill. I want to clarify about the German issue in the founding. It wasn't a vote to make German the official language, but there was a vote to print federal laws in German as well as English. There was a proposal to do that, and but it never but that was just a proposal. It didn't actually ever come up for a vote. So, but yeah, people are surprised, and polling data shows most people think English already is the official language of this country, and they're surprised to know it's not. And the polling data shows that when people hear it's not, they want it to be. In fact, most of the polls consistently show over 80% of the American people want English to be our official language. And I'm looking at our webpage right now, proenglish.org. If you go under research, you'll see all the polling data we have up there, English by the polls. Bill, this cuts across all kinds of lines, party lines, ethnic lines, education, religious, income. On almost no other issue will you find so much support. So I would, encourage your listeners to take heart. It's actually, the majority of Americans want this. It's only these sort of loudmouth cultural elites that are trying to say it's bigoted or racist. So
I was mentioning off air, we had that brief discussion off air where I talked about the statement made. It may have been, I think I may have seen it at the Daily Caller, that the mayor of Manchester, New Hampshire, was saying that there are 83 different languages, and Manchester's not a huge city. 83 different languages being spoken in the local high schools. Mm-hmm. How can you function?
Yeah, no, that's perfectly true. I mean, there's actually 300 different languages spoken in this country. So how do you pick and choose which languages you're going to translate for and which ones you won't? In fact, when Kathleen Sebelius was the HHS secretary, she announced that she was going to provide Obamacare in over 150 different languages. Well, who's paying for that? And what does that do to promote assimilation? So at Pro English, we actually filed a Freedom of Information Act request to find out what this is going to cost the taxpayer for all this translation work. And Bill, you'd probably not be surprised to learn that they have been very slow and not very forthcoming on revealing that info for us. So.
A decade or so ago, I was talking to a state legislator in New York, and at the time, I think that schools in New York City were teaching in 18 different languages, and at the time, they had to hire all of those different teachers, and that's not just a teacher to teach you. You're talking multiple subjects, so you don't have 18 different teachers. You have 18 times how many subjects are being taught in the schools. No wonder we're breaking our budgets because of these issues.
Yeah, and when schools do use that bilingual education approach that sort of emerged in the 70s, the students aren't learning English, so they're being held back. Our chairman, Dr. Rosalie Porter, she came here from Italy at the age of 6, and her family didn't know very much English, but she learned it very quickly in the schools because back then we had a focus on immersing people in English, and she was able to succeed and get her PhD. And she is a strong advocate for English immersion in the schools instead of these bilingual programs you mentioned where you have multiple subjects being taught in multiple languages, and it's not effective, and it certainly doesn't help the taxpayer.
Bob Vandervoort is joining us this morning from Pro English and talking about this effort to try and bring about English as a national language, only taking us nearly 2.5 centuries to do that. When you mentioned James Inhofe, now he's from Oklahoma, where I'm sure that this is an issue that he's got a great deal of support. And in the Midwest and in the Western states, flyover country as it's called, I'm sure that's the case. But you reference the elites. And because of the population centers in California, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, I would imagine that's the hurdle you have to clear. Or even in Florida, where we now have Southern Florida is really a Spanish speaking enclave, it would be very difficult, I would guess, to find legislative support in places like that.
Well, I mean, yes and no. It's interesting that some of the states you mentioned, at least back in the 80s, did pass official English laws. Uh, Florida is one. California is another. If you go to our webpage, proenglish.org, we've got a map that lists all of the states that have official English on the books. But I think the resistance, there's sort of a fear, I would think, from our political leaders. They don't want to be, screamed and hollered at by activists that they're doing the wrong thing, and yet most Americans think this would be the right thing to do. In fact, most immigrants support official English. It's just these so-called spokesmen of these so-called immigrant groups that speak out against making English official.
I would imagine, though, that if you have a state like California that made this decision on its own 30 years ago, but if you were to ask a Barbara Boxer today if she would support this on the national level, she's looking over her shoulder, and you've got that. That's the one thing I would think Democrats fear is some sort of a backlash from their own base on this.
Well, it's possible. I mean, but there is a lot of Democratic support, at least among the rank and file. I mean, you certainly you do have more of the old-fashioned liberal believes that immigrants should come and assimilate and learn English, and that's how they'll succeed. There's this sort of the newer multicultural left, I would say, that's pushed back against that old, kind of Arthur Schlesinger style liberal assimilation model. Now they're full on with the kind of confrontational, almost an anti-American type aggressiveness.
Has it been that people in the past did not push hard enough for this because they just didn't feel, though, that one of the things I heard this past week from all of the talking points from Hillary Clinton's team was, well, we have bigger issues to talk about, and that's how you usually you try to spin things and deal with them when you don't like them. But I get the impression that this has been a big issue with the rank and file when you mention that in probably both political parties as well as just most Americans. But it seems that it gets buried every time it comes up because someone says we've got a bigger crisis we have to handle at the moment.
Well, I think there may be some evidence of that. I know there's some of the polling data shows that people very strongly by wide margins from all sectors support this idea, but they're not. The intensity of the support is not as strong as, say, on other issues. So, without that passion to make English official, I think you're correct that sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. But there is sort of a bigger issue here because we can look to countries, say, just to our north in Canada, where they're divided over language with Quebec versus the English-speaking parts of the country. And you can look, actually, last night I was at there was a Ukrainian cultural event that was being hosted in the area, which I attended, and they talked a little bit about the conflict there. And one of the things that is a part of that conflict, it's not the only thing, but there is a divide over language in Ukraine between the Russian-speaking portion of the country versus the Ukrainian-speaking portion. So language can divide nations, and in that sense, it is a vital and important issue that we need to really take seriously.
And the reference to Canada, I went to visit a friend who worked at CBC probably 14, 15 years ago, and was told, look, everybody, despite what the government says, everybody still speaks English. You can't accomplish anything in the city without it. And if you went into the local Italian social club, we did that for coffee, everyone spoke English. When you went down the street to the local Greek diner, everyone spoke English. And if you called someone on the telephone at a business and they answered in French and you just simply say something in English, they would quickly just transition. So it's almost it's one of those things that they did because I think it made people feel nice, but it really doesn't hold any. It's not effective, and so you can hear these arguments. That would probably be the argument made by the folks on the left. It's done successfully other places, but it really isn't.
Yeah, it's not, and I think a lot of those laws were passed to cater to, as you know, the French Quebec province, And what's resulted is there's a huge cost to the taxpayers in Canada for all these translations that parts of Canada would never even use because they just use English. And there's also some real friction about that. There are certain government jobs in Canada will only go to people who are fluent in both languages. So that shuts out a lot of people from some good jobs. And that's a concern. You could see something like that starting to happen here, where unless you speak another language, if you're just an English speaker, you could be finding yourself discriminated against.
It's 8:54 on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. 38 at our studios. This is Top Story with Bill Colley. Our guest, Bob Vandervoort, is the director of Pro English, joining us this morning, and he's talking about the effort to make English the official language of the United States. I have two other things I wanted to run by you. I remember Pat Buchanan saying in an interview a couple of years ago that whenever someone says diversity makes us stronger, they don't actually have any evidence to provide for that argument. And number two, if we had English as the official language, would it discourage some immigration here, let's say maybe in favor of more English-speaking people who already are familiar with the culture because of the language?
Well, I think on your first point, Pat Buchanan, he's been a very strong supporter of official English in his columns and in his writings. So I think that he's if you look at his books, and I mean the work he's put into studying this, I think he's right. There definitely is. It's very hard to find where this multicultural model has been successful for any long-term duration. And to your second point on what would happen if we made English the official language, I'm not 100% certain how that would affect immigration patterns, but I do think that it would certainly send an important message to people, especially to new arrivals, that if you want to interact with your government of your newly chosen land, you're going to have to interact with them in English and not expect, like what Kathleen Sebelius did, that she'll provide you with over 180 different translators to sign up for government programs. So I do think that in that sense, it would encourage greater assimilation to our country.
I was going to say, imagine that, setting expectations and discipline. There's a novel thought.
Yeah. Well, if we did it in the past, I think we could do it again and it would work.
Again, for people who are tuning in, listening, can you give them the website? They can go there and obviously learn a great deal more about this.
Yeah, check out proenglish.org, and if you go to that webpage, there's a lot of resources, and they can also sign up for our emails. We send them out, about monthly, so we won't fill up your inbox, but we will give you some important info on this issue.
I thank you very much for your time, and the day may come, I hope soon, where we can talk about the success.
Yes, I look forward to it.
Well, you'll have to find another line of work, though.
Well, we still have a few states left that haven't passed it, so we'll have to focus on them when that happens. So.
All right. Well, Bob, thank you much for your time this morning, and enjoy the day.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. You too.
Take care now. Bob Vandervoort is the director of Pro English, joining us this morning from his office in suburban Washington, and sharing some thoughts with us about that effort to make English the official language of the United States. As he pointed out, there are some sponsors now behind this legislation in both the Senate and in the House, but they need a few more people to sign on. And as he said early on, if you're just joining us, he said early on, one of the things that you can do is urge your own members of the House and Senate to get behind this bill. So that would mean if you happen to see at a town meeting or you have an opportunity to perhaps contact the office of one of your two U.S. senators, you could go ahead and do that. Of course, that would be Jim Risch and, of course, Mike Crapo. And over on the House side, you've got Congressman Simpson and Congressman Labrador. And Congressman Labrador, who is bilingual, by the way, I'm sure would actually back this notion. That's an opportunity for you. Pick up that telephone, make that call, or send that letter or email, and see if we can't get the ball rolling on all of this. It's 8:58. News is coming up next from Fox. And then one more hour of Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Got plenty more to talk about, too, as well, in the next hour. It looked like a victory this week when it came to the ATF's effort to ban certain rounds of ammunition. But now you've got people who are fighting back, the anti-gun left, making a lot of noise. More details on the way.